the books. That's what we're asking people to do. If you can, if you are able-bodied, and or if you're semi-able-bodied like me, we could use a few hours of your time on Tuesday. We are concentrating on 2 election districts, and one in Queens and one in Westchester County. I just drove down from Westchester just now. These are 2 Democratic incumbents, Joe Adavo and Susie Oppenheimer, who are targeted by the Republicans and by the real estate lobby, and who we have to make sure get reelected. If you can't go to Queens or Westchester, you can phone bank for a couple of hours on Tuesday, what we call get out the vote. Can I have my wine? I've just been admonished to not speak too much longer. Thank you, Susan. Okay, so I've really talked about the legislation next year, but what I can tell you is very, very serious. And it's not that we won't have problems if the Democrats keep the majority, but at least we will have a chance. And if the Republicans recapture the Senate on Tuesday, we will be in serious trouble. Now, let me just talk a little bit about co-op conversion. And some of you are probably not going to like a couple of things that I'm going to say. First, I want to say that a co-op is not a panacea. And co-ops often come with lots of problems. And often the people who are the most victimized in a conversion are the people who buy. Now, that doesn't have to be the case, but it often is the case. I've seen it. So it's a complicated issue. But I want to raise the issue of long-term affordability. And I think the Tenants Association has done a phenomenal job of pulling people together in the last couple of years and creating this incredible movement at Stuytown and Peter Cooper Village with an enormous, very impressive stance of unity. Now, it's not that I don't understand that some people are going to want to buy. Obviously, there are people who would like to buy. There are obviously a lot of people who won't, and there are a lot of people who can't even think about it. But if you are going to keep Stuytown, Peter Cooper Village as affordable on a long-term basis, there are 2 things that need to happen, and this is unusual. In a normal co-op conversion, over time, the entire complex will become unaffordable. It will become market rate. And the reason for that is that, I'm assuming this will be a non-eviction plan, which almost is certain because eviction plans almost don't happen anymore. But in a non-eviction plan, people who don't buy can stay as rent-stabilized apartments until the apartment is vacant. At that point, it's vacancy decontrol. So over time, once a building is converted to a co-op in a non-eviction plan, all of the apartments, whether they are sold or not, whether they get sold when they become vacant or whether they get rented out as market rent apartments when they become vacant, when people move, die, or get evicted, they become unaffordable. They become market rate. So you need to think in terms of an unusual twist to a conversion, which is to establish a significant block of apartments that would remain rent stabilized on a permanent basis. I don't know what I haven't talked to some of the attorneys who handle this stuff, but it's an interesting legal question, but I think it's an important policy question. Otherwise, over time, the entire complex will become unaffordable. The other thing is that if you are going to keep the place affordable for the future, you need to impose resale restrictions, meaning not to allow people to sell their apartments for a market price when they want to sell. So people who want to flip aren't going to like that. And I'm sure there are people in the audience who don't like my saying that, but that's my opinion. And I think those are 2 very important things for the Tenants Association to consider and to weigh. So let's see you on the campaign trail in the next few days. I'm going to be passing out this flyer about where the phone bank is and how you sign up. It's right here, 204 East 23rd Street, so you can walk here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Michael. Our next speaker is Dan Garodnick. Step up, Dan.
Thank you very much, Susan, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to say a few words today. And I wanted to bring greetings to the very patient people who are watching right now, simulcast from the fourth floor of Baruch College. Thank you to all of you for your patience in waiting outside. I went and I couldn't believe actually the line went around the corner. Next time, I think we're going to need Madison Square Garden. So, a lot has happened since our last meeting. And, of course, a lot more is going to happen before this process is through. The point of today is to bring everyone up to speed and make sure that you leave here with good and accurate information and the very best understanding of what is coming next. As your neighbor, I run into many of you around the community, so I have a pretty good sense of what is on people's minds. I also spent several hours in Stuyvesant Oval the other day listening to questions and doing my best to explain what is going on. So I'm going to take a few minutes this afternoon at the request of the Tenants Association to bring you all up to speed on recent events and explain why I believe that the organized tenants of this community are in a very strong position. As you all know, the story of this transaction has been filled with legal maneuvers, judicial rulings, appeals, delays, and gambles by outside investors. And that is just since we came together for the last time in March, in that rainy day. Let me just touch on a few of the big moments from that last 7-month story, and I encourage you to grab a complete timeline that is available for you at the back of the room. Today, the title to the property is still in the name of Tishman Speyer, but CW Capital is firmly in the driver's seat. You recall CW Capital represents the interests of the senior lenders in the Tishman Speyer transaction. All of CW's challengers have come and gone. It's now just them and us, at least for now. You'll remember the hedge fund Appaloosa Management, which tried to intervene in a foreclosure action in the spring. They were denied in court, and they have not been active since. Then, Pershing Square, the hedge fund controlled by Bill Ackman, came in. They partnered with Winthrop Realty Trust to buy $300 million worth of Stuyvesant Town debt for pennies on the dollar, and their plan was to hold a foreclosure auction before CW's and to assume control themselves. Well, CW sued them in court to stop that from happening, and they won. CW Capital won. That cleared the way for CW to hold its foreclosure auction on October 4th, but that didn't happen, of course. They delayed it, and they delayed it again and again in order to negotiate with Pershing Square and Winthrop to buy out their share of the debt. That is the transaction that was just completed this week that you all read about. CW essentially paid Pershing Square to go away, and that leaves CW now fundamentally in control. By buying out their last known challenger, CW Capital can worry a little bit less about litigation. That is, except, of course, the outstanding Roberts versus Tishman Speyer case, which you all remember held that the deregulation of units while the property was receiving the J51 tax benefit violated the law. The liabilities of that Roberts case now belong to CW Capital, and we are going to hear in a few moments from Alex Schmidt in a moment to talk about where that case stands. The advisors from Moelis and Paul Weiss will go into more detail about what CW Capital's next move could be, but most significantly, CW is now much freer to move forward with the Tenants Association on a restructuring plan. After all these many months, we now know who will be seated across the table from the Tenants Association, and we can get down to business. But don't expect things to happen quickly. This was a very, very complicated deal in the first place, and it is going to be extremely complicated to restructure. but I believe that more certainty is good for us. After 10 months of intrigue since Tishman Speyer defaulted back in January, not to mention the 3 years of being pursued in court, the stability of this community being rocked by a culture of greed, it is time for all of us to have a little peace and quiet. And I believe that we are on the right path to get us there. Whether you are a rent-stabilized tenant who wants to continue as a renter, or someone who may want an opportunity to buy your home, there are reasons to be hopeful today. The TA, backed by elected officials at every level of government, will be pushing CW Capital and Fannie and Freddie, also key stakeholders here, to do right by the residents of this community, and we have already begun to see some positive signs. In August, in a letter to the TA's advisors, CW Capital committed to pursuing the Tenants Association's goals. That included protecting renters, giving people an opportunity to buy if they wish, and the long-term affordability and stability of this community. Now they are in a position to put their words into action, and we will expect no less. The tenants also hold some significant leverage in this deal. As I'm going to mention in a moment, the surest way for CW Capital to recoup the money that is owed to them is through a conversion plan. And a conversion plan can only work if large numbers of tenants are actually interested in buying their units. Simply put, if tenants do not believe that the deal is good enough for them to want to buy, the deal will simply not be good enough, and it will not go forward. And in that way, the interests of the tenants and CW Capital are aligned. Of course, let's be realistic for a moment. There are other ways in which our interests may not be aligned with CW. They are now an adverse party in the Roberts litigation, and we will all collectively act swiftly if they take unreasonable actions toward individual tenants. And we will not forget that they represent the very parties who helped finance the failed Tishman Speyer deal that got us into this mess in the first place. Most significantly, a united body of tenants can fight for the best price, for assurances on long-term affordability and stability, for guarantees on quality maintenance, and of course, a prohibition on developing the property's open spaces. Again, for any deal to work, it must put tenants in a position that is better than the position that they are in today. No more stress for rent-stabilized tenants who worry about getting legal notices as they did so frequently over the past 3 years. And choices and good, responsible opportunities for everyone. So let's cover a few fundamentals of a workable plan. There are 3 areas that I want to discuss, and I'm going to do them briefly, and then you're going to hear from the professional advisors who will delve much deeper into what I am touching on now. Maintenance, ownership options, and rent stabilization. I'm going to start with the last one first, because you heard from Mike McKee, you heard from Assemblyman Kavanaugh. We need to make sure that rent stabilization is renewed next year. If rent stabilization goes out, the rents go up, and fundamental protections that have existed in this community for so long evaporate. And that much is obvious, or should be obvious to everyone in this room. Higher rents, in turn, increase the overall value of the property. And in a conversion to a co-op or to a condo, higher property values mean that apartments would need to be sold at higher prices. Those same high rents would also make this property irresistible to real estate speculators. We just don't want to go down that road again. So it is in everyone's interest to keep rent stabilization in place. There can be no compromising on that. No compromising on that. And we know that Assemblyman Kavanaugh and Senator Duane will continue to fight for that, as they always have. Now, I encourage you not to lose sight of that battle that is coming in 2011. and there are going to be many opportunities to lend